Hi, I'm James. I'm the winemaking and viticulture assistant here at Felton Road, down in beautiful, usually sunny Central Otago. So I'll talk you through a little bit of the history of Felton Road wines. We're here in the Elms vineyard where our winery is situated. The vineyard was first planted in 1991 by our founding owner, Stewart Elms. And he was a hotelier from Dunedin who had a passion for fine wine and had sort of the kind of crazy idea to plant vines this far south, but did a lot of meticulous study of soil types, expositions, ways to maximize the amount of sunlight and warmth that the vines would experience, and then chose this spot at the end of dusty little old Felton Road. So much of the original planting is still here. So the vines that you would see behind me in the distance, well, if you can see them, that is block 3, source of one of our most famous wines, and much of it is still from those original plantings from 91. So those vines are now getting on to 34 years old, which by our standards is pretty venerable. So Stewart, in his desire to kind of become a vigneron, had studied at Lincoln University, doing a graduate program in viticulture and enology. He was, I think at 55, the oldest member of his class. So for his labs, he was paired with the youngest member of his class. He's a bloke called Blair Walter, whom many of you may have heard of. He is our winemaker and general manager still today. So they met up, and basically Stewart said to Blair, go out, get some experience in winemaking, go work in all the great regions of the world, and then once the vineyard's ready, come back and make wine for me. So that was basically the deal, and Blair went out and worked in California and Australia and Burgundy before coming back to New Zealand. And then they got into it with the first vintage in 1997. That worked very well for the first few years. Stewart decided to sell in 2000, and he was basically put in contact by Alan Brady, who's one of the sort of great leading lights and pioneers of Central Otago viticulture, with a wild-haired English bloke called Nigel Greening, who still owns Felton Road to this day. Nigel took over Felton Road in 2000, bringing with him his Cornish Point vineyard that he planted that year. So we had 2 vineyards. We added into that the Calvert vineyard, which is about 1.5 kilometres up the road, and then latterly McMuir vineyard that was planted in 2012. And basically from the moment that Nigel sort of stepped foot on the property, he and Gareth, our vineyard and estate manager, and Blair all kind of agreed to pursue organic production, and then latterly Biodynamics, which is a sort of farming system that incorporates circularity with a slight mystical element for sure, but I think it's as much about just treating the farm as a closed unit and taking the best possible care of both your soils and your people. And it's a system that's done us very well. Today we have about 34 hectares of vineyard in total. Of that, it's about 80% Pinot Noir, 12% or so Chardonnay, and the rest Riesling. Spread across 4 sites, of which the site here where the winery is situated, the Elms Vineyard, is our biggest. So if I was going to speak to why I think our wines are special, or why I'm so proud to every time I drink them, I guess, is I think it starts with the big macro decisions that were made really from the beginning, and we owe a great debt of gratitude to Stewart and his fastidiousness with selecting these sites, and then Nigel with his humility in the way that he planted his Cornish Point site. Because the reality is that the best vineyards make the best fruit, and the best fruit make the easiest wine to make, because you have to do as little as possible to them, and that way they have just greatest expression. I think the natural processes in winemaking, so that is the synthesis of flavor in grapes, and then that conversion of potential flavor into actual flavor through the fermentation process. These are the kind of most complex and inimitable processes, and that's where the real magic of wine comes from. So we're incredibly fortunate that a really smart guy chose the perfect spots to plant vines. And then we're also really lucky that we have a company where we've had one winemaker and one viticulturalist for the entirety of our history. Between them, they've got almost 60 years of experience of this land and the fruit that comes from it. And I think that level of experience and consistency means that they know, they have a wisdom to not overreach, not to push too hard, not to intervene where they don't need to. And that philosophy definitely flows through to Blair's approach in the winery, where a light touch is preferred. We get up to about 30 fermenters every year of Pinot Noir, and the goal is to make the best wine from each one. And that generally means treating them as equals, be it block 13 from up on the hill or block 3, which is going to go into a very famous wine. Everything kind of gets the same treatment, and that allows the fruit to express itself and thus the land as well. And that, I think, brings the sort of the magic of our wines, and a wine that, you know, doesn't taste like anybody else's, because we're not trying to approximate anything else, but we're trying to make the best of what we have from our place, and a place that, you know, includes both vines but also people, and I think that's kind of where the magic really comes from. We've been farming organically and biodynamically, certified since 2009, but practicing effectively from the moment Nigel stepped foot on the scene. And that was a kind of collective decision, I think, based really in kind of shared values that Nigel, Blair and Gareth all have. And so if you think about biodynamics, one of the first principles is to treat the farm as a closed unit. And what that means is essentially that you're trying to minimize the amount of inputs you're bringing from outside of the farm onto the farm, and likewise not letting any waste sort of escape. And that has like really profound knock-on effects. So we basically recycle everything that we possibly can. So we get by with less than a domestic wheelie bin in terms of actual waste, but it means that we produce our own compost from our grape mark. We cycle all of the prunings from the vines back into the land as well. And then any excess wine sort of, any of the juice settlings of the wine, they go back into the vineyard, they go into the compost as well. And that's all part of sort of not wasting anything and encouraging sort of microbial life in the soil. And the idea being that the more full of life your soils are, the more resilient those soils are to supporting vines in varying conditions. And obviously in Central Otago, being on the sort of southernmost limit of where you can grow grapes, you know, that variability of season is something that we have to be, you know, mindful of, and fortunately having living healthy soils is a great buffer against that. And then I suppose we would think about in terms of also a kind of custodianship. You know, there's a real humility amongst both management and ownership here, that, you know, we should have an intent to leave the land better than what we inherited it, and that's a long-standing tradition. So that applies to organics in terms of minimizing the amount of chemicals that we want to put onto the vines. But we've also been embracing it in terms of carbon neutrality, because we are aware that our activities here do extend well beyond the farm gate. Converted our whole company road fleet to electric vehicles, and we've been trialing an electric drone for spraying our crops rather than using a tractor. That saved a few thousand litres of diesel so far, so we're pretty optimistic about that. And it is our goal to be carbon neutral by 2045. So we're already well on our way with that. We've sort of shaved about 25% off our emissions so far, which is something we're really excited about. I think probably the wine that defines Felton Road the most would be the Bannockburn Pinot Noir. I say this, there are more famous wines from our portfolio, not least the Block 3 and Block 5, which are incredibly sought after and highly allocated wines. But I think the reason that I personally feel like the Bannockburn means the most to me is that it represents all 4 of our vineyards and captures an essence of what each of them makes each of them special. So it might have some of that floral lift that you see from Cornish Point, some of that dark fruited character from McMure, maybe the tannic structure of Calvert, or the spicy notes that you'd see in a Block 3 or a Block 5. But also because its quality and the fact that we see it as a peer to its single vineyard and single block fellows is a testament to the fact that we farm it to the same standard. And because we farm it to the same standard and we respect the land to the same level, and the vineyards were so well chosen, the quality of the fruit it's different but equal to Block 3 or Block 5. And that means that we have the luxury in the winery of treating it exactly the same. No makeup, no polishing. You know, it gets the same treatment in terms of whole cluster, in terms of extraction, in terms of new oak aging. So the wine that comes out, it's got this ability to manifest as an expression of Bannockburn in a given year. It really does reflect the vintage, which I think is an incredibly important element of a fine wine. And it's incredibly drinkable and open and delicious. So yeah, it's the one we make the most of. So by definition, it's the one that we've put the most work into. So that's why it means the most to me. I think an often sort of overlooked dimension of biodynamics, and one of the ways that I really respect how we've managed to adapt it into our culture, is the human dimension of it. I don't think it's any coincidence that the number of people who've worked here for more than 20 years is, I think, about 30% of the full-time workforce. You know, I've only been here for 5 years and I'm still the new guy. And the reality is that I think when you look at the farm as a single unit, that means you have to look at the people who are on it every bit as much as the land that you're farming or the product that you're producing. And so we take really great pride in taking care of our people, celebrating anniversaries, but also in the biodynamic farming, the rituals where involves us getting up at dawn to spread preparations on the vines. That's followed by a breakfast, and it's a real honor to be the person that gets to cook the breakfast. It's a tradition that Nigel established and we carry on. But I think it's just a real testament to this place that so many people have worked here for so long, and probably a key to why the place is so magic. People like Bruce, who celebrates his 20th anniversary in our vines this year. There are dimensions of certain blocks that only he looks after and only he knows the best. So I guess there's a way in which you can taste our wines and say, think of Bruce, for instance, and he's an amazing guy. Yeah, a little bit cheesy, but perhaps that's about the magic.